Every time you get exactly what you wanted and still feel empty an hour later, that's not a character flaw. It's a design feature of the mind that nobody told you about. Once you understand why pleasure never satisfies, you stop blaming yourself for the emptiness and start working with reality instead of against it. In this video, I'll show you number 1, why getting what you want reliably makes you want more, and why willpower alone will never break that cycle. Number 2, the specific mechanism the Vedic tradition identified thousands of years ago that modern neuroscience is now confirming. Number 3, a different kind of satisfaction that doesn't require anything to change in your external life, and how to start accessing it. Let's get into it. A few years back, I was talking to a guy named Marcus. He had just closed the biggest deal of his career. New car in the driveway, family vacation booked, the house he'd been working toward for a decade. And he called me not to celebrate. He called me because 3 days after the deal closed, he felt nothing, worse than nothing. He felt a low-grade dread he couldn't name. He said, "If this isn't it, what is?" That question is exactly where this starts. Marcus isn't unusual. His story is the rule, not the exception. Positive psychologists have a name for what happened to him. They call it the hedonic treadmill. The research is consistent and it's not flattering. When you acquire something you strongly desire, your happiness levels spike. Then within weeks, sometimes days, they return to exactly where they were before. The new car becomes background noise. The house becomes the place where problems live. The promotion becomes the new baseline, and the next level starts looking necessary. But here's what the research doesn't fully explain. Why? Why are we built this way? Why does the mind refuse to stay satisfied? The Vedic answer to that question is older than any psychology department, and it's more precise than "you adapt to things." The teaching is this: the senses are instruments designed to interact with the material world. That's their function. They're built to scan, detect, acquire, and move on. A sense organ that stayed permanently satisfied would stop working. The eye that keeps staring at one thing stops seeing. The tongue that holds one taste stops tasting. The mind that fixates on one object stops processing. Satisfaction, from the senses' perspective, is a malfunction. This is what the Vedic tradition calls bhoga. The word translates roughly as sense enjoyment, but the concept is more specific than that. Bhoga describes the cycle where contact with a desired object produces temporary relief, which then generates a stronger craving for the next contact. It's not a ladder you climb toward contentment. It's a wheel that spins faster the harder you push it. Neuroscience now maps this almost exactly. Dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical, that's the popular version. And it's wrong. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It fires hardest not when you get the thing, but when you're about to get it. The moment of acquisition, dopamine drops. Then the system recalibrates upward, meaning the same stimulus produces less response next time, and a stronger stimulus is needed to generate the same anticipation spike. That's not a moral failing. That's neurobiology doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The problem isn't that you're weak or undisciplined or ungrateful. The problem is that you've been using a tool for a job it was never designed to do. You've been asking your senses to provide a kind of satisfaction they are structurally incapable of delivering. Marcus wasn't broken, he had simply reached the end of a road that was always going to end there. The reason most people never break the bogus cycle isn't lack of awareness, it's that the cycle disguises itself at a critical moment. Think about how it actually feels from the inside. You want something. The wanting is uncomfortable, a low hum of lack. You get the thing. For a brief window, the wanting goes quiet. That quiet feels like satisfaction. But what you're actually experiencing is the temporary absence of craving, not the presence of contentment. Those two things feel identical in the moment. That's the trap. The Vedic texts, particularly the Bhagavad Gita, describe this with a precision that's almost uncomfortable to read. The teaching is that the senses are said to be superior to the body. The mind is superior to the senses. Intelligence is superior to the mind, and the self is superior to intelligence. Each layer is more fundamental than the last. What that hierarchy tells us is that when you try to satisfy the self through sense objects, you're working at the wrong level. It's like trying to fix a software problem by repainting the computer. The action isn't wrong exactly, it's just operating on the wrong layer. The mechanism that keeps this invisible is what the Vedic tradition calls rajas, one of the three gunas or qualities of material nature. Rajas is the quality of restlessness, passion, and craving. When Rajas dominates the mind, it doesn't just create desire, it makes desire feel like purpose. The urgent wanting feels like it means something, like chasing the next thing is the point of being alive. This is why people in the middle of the boga cycle don't usually feel like they're trapped. They feel motivated, they feel driven. The dissatisfaction that follows each acquisition gets reinterpreted almost immediately as evidence that they just need to aim higher, work harder, want better things. The wheel doesn't feel like a wheel, it feels like progress. I worked with a woman a while back, a high performer, genuinely impressive career, who described her life as always being one thing away from okay. One more year of savings, one more promotion, one more relationship milestone. She wasn't in denial about the pattern. She could see it clearly when she talked about it. But inside the experience, each new target felt completely justified, completely different from the last one that hadn't delivered. That's Rajas. It doesn't just create craving, it creates the narrative that makes craving feel rational. The practical implication here is significant. You can't think your way out of this cycle from inside it because the thinking itself is being shaped by the same quality of mind that's driving the craving. What's needed is a different vantage point entirely. And that's what the third part of this is about. There's a concept in the Vedic tradition that gets mistranslated constantly, and the mistranslation makes it useless. The word is santosha. It usually gets rendered as contentment, which makes it sound passive, like resignation dressed up in spiritual language. That's not what it means. Santosha is better understood as sufficiency that doesn't depend on circumstances. It's not the absence of desire, it's the presence of a stability that exists underneath desire, a baseline that doesn't move when external conditions shift. The reason this matters is that it points to a different source of satisfaction entirely, not sense objects, not achievement, not the temporary quiet that follows getting what you wanted, something that's already present and doesn't require acquisition. The Gita frames this as the difference between the self and the instruments of the self. The senses, the mind, the intelligence, these are instruments, they're not you. The part of you that watches the wanting, that notices the emptiness after the acquisition, that asks, if this isn't it, what is? That part is not the instrument, that's the witness. And the witness in Vedic understanding is not hungry. It's not lacking, it doesn't need the next thing. Now, I want to be careful here because this is where this teaching can become impractical very fast. I'm not saying stop wanting things. I'm not saying detach from outcomes and float through life in a state of blissful indifference. That's a misreading. What the teaching actually says is that you can act fully in the world, pursue goals, engage with life completely, without making your stability conditional on the outcome. The action is the same, the relationship to the action is different. Here's what that looks like in practice. There's a specific exercise I've seen work for people stuck in the boga cycle. After any acquisition, any moment where you got something you wanted, pause before the mind immediately recalibrates to the next target, not to savor it in a forced way, just to notice the noticing, to be the part of you that's watching the experience rather than the part that's inside it. That pause is not passive. It's a redirection of attention from the surface layer of the mind to something underneath it. Even 10 seconds of that is different from the default. Over time, with repetition, you start to build a felt sense of that stable layer, not as a concept, as something you can actually locate. This is what the research on meditation and interoception is now pointing toward. The studies on default mode network deactivation, on the correlation between present moment awareness and baseline well being, these are mapping the same territory the Vedic tradition was describing. The language is different, the mechanism is the same. Santosha isn't a destination. It's a practice of returning to a layer of yourself that was always there, that doesn't need the next thing to be okay, and that can coexist with full engagement in the world. Marcus, the guy I mentioned at the start, didn't stop being ambitious after we worked through this. He still pursues things, but he described the shift as the wanting lost its teeth. He could want something without the wanting running him. That's the difference this makes. That 10-second pause is a real starting point. But for most people, the harder question is what to do when you've already tried slowing down and the cycle just restarts anyway. If you've read about the hedonic treadmill, you've sat with this idea. You've even had moments where you could see the pattern clearly, but you keep finding yourself back on the wheel. The fastest way through that isn't another video, it's a conversation. I do free 15 to 30-minute calls. No pitch, no agenda other than figuring out exactly where you're stuck and what the actual next move is for your specific situation. You'll walk away from that call with a clear picture of what's keeping the cycle in place and one concrete thing to do about it, whether we ever talk again or not. The link to book is in the description. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. What's the one thing you've pursued most consistently? Expecting it to finally feel like enough?